Riley played 8 years of professional hockey, including 4 with the Philadelphia Flyers. His hard style of play eventually took its toll, and he decided to retire from playing at the ripe age of 28, committed to a life dedicated to self-care, mindfulness, and personal development. Riley felt called to be of service and embarked on a quest to heal and discover optimum wellness and share his discoveries with the world. Between the mental health crises, the opioid crises, and the obesity crises, it was clear to him that we have become extremely disconnected in our personal lives and lack the true essence of life, positive energy, and self-love. Everyone, welcome to the stage, Riley Cote.
All right. Well, it's an honor to be here. I am grateful for the opportunity to be speaking to you guys today. And as mentioned, my name is Riley Cote. I am a former NHL enforcer and now entrepreneurial yogi. I went from sitting in the penalty box and also sitting on the bench like yourself to sitting in meditation and sitting on phone calls all day long. So lots of fun. But obviously my philosophy on life has changed significantly. And I now subscribe to a life and living on purpose, living with absolute intention and really defining my why in everything I do. Definiteness of purpose is the starting point of all achievement. Purpose defines priorities. And growing up in the middle of Canada, I had one simple priority, and that was to play hockey. And my purpose was to play in the NHL. As long as I could remember, growing up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, it was my childhood dream of playing the NHL. Every opportunity I had, I hopped on the ice, the pond, the local community center, the rinks, you name it. It was just, it was ingrained in my DNA. Grew up in Winnipeg playing all my youth hockey. Was I guess you could say, a bigger fish in a small pond. As far as talent goes, I thought I was Wayne Gretzky. I was humbled quickly when I was 15 years old and drafted to the Western Hockey League, where the following year I landed up moving away from home, 16 years old, played 4 years in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan for the Prince Albert Raiders. Again, now realizing that I wasn't as good as I thought I was. I was now a small fish in a big pond. And the pond wasn't even that big, it was Western Canada, but big enough to realize that I really wasn't that good. So those first couple of years of junior hockey were an adjustment for me, and I landed up having to, I guess, start to understand what role playing was, and took a lesser role, playing on the fourth line, grinding, playing limited minutes, limited games, and it kind of wore on me. I was, in my mind, I still thought I was as good as I was before, and what happened? How can I not be as impactful as I was? Those first couple of years were a little bit of a grind mentally, emotionally. However, years 3 and 4, I landed up taking on a larger role on the team and get back into my scoring, thinking of Wayne Gretzky again. But I never got drafted to the NHL, and I was kind of sitting there and humming and hawing and wondering what went wrong and thinking that was the end of my my hockey journey. So I kind of sat back and reevaluated my approach to the game, and I decided that I was going to find a new purpose within the hockey game, and I was going to take on the role of the enforcer. So I decided to be a hockey fighter. At the age of 20, turned pro, went to Toronto Maple Leafs training camp, and I had the mindset of becoming the enforcer. I was going out there to fight everyone and their brother, the biggest guy and the guy with the most penalty minutes. So I had my targets, and I had them all lined up, and I went about my business. I landed up signing with the St. John's Maple Leafs that year. I could have went back to junior for one more year of junior hockey. I landed up turning pro and just kind of, took that leap of faith, if you will, that this was going to be my vehicle to find my way to the NHL. And I still believed in myself. That was the biggest thing, is I just knew that I just had to do things differently. I was no longer going to score 50 goals a year and be that Wayne Gretzky figure that I thought I was. It was going to be that Ty Domi, that Donald Brashear type of guy, and George LaRock, that these guys I grew up watching with the Winnipeg Jets and playing against the Winnipeg Jets. So I entered my first year pro and again fought everyone and their brother. The biggest guys, the guy that was most penalty minutes, and that was my approach. I landed up fighting, I think, 35 times that first year. And just put that in perspective, in 4 years of junior hockey, I fought, I think it's like 18 times. So now in one hockey season, I almost doubled that. And these guys weren't small. These guys were freaks of nature. A lot of steroid use down in the Central Hockey League there my first year, and just some big humans. And we were doing the same thing I was. They were fighting out of fear of failure, self-preservation, whatever it landed up being. There was a dark cloud around some of these guys. All I wanted to do was get the hell out of the Central Hockey League and find my way to the next league, so I could, work my way up the ladder that way. So the first year landed up being interesting. I always loved being challenged, and taking on this role was a challenge, right? It was no longer about hockey anymore. It was just about fighting, and it consumed me. I say almost to a fault. However, I embraced it, and I took on the challenge. And then the next year, I went to Columbus Blue Jackets training camp. Landed up with the Syracuse Crunch. Had an eye injury that almost landed up losing my eye, and then landed up in the East Coast Hockey League. Fought another 35 times, and going about my business, the biggest guys and the guys with the most penalty minutes. And then 04-05, it was the NHL lockout, and I went back to the Central Hockey League where I'd played the year before because there was no jobs available, and I was like, man, this is it. This is my dream is looking pretty meek. And then I was there 3 days, and I get a phone call from Ron Hextall, who was at the time the assistant general manager of the Philadelphia Phantoms. And he says, listen, we want to sign you to a 25-game tryout. Come to Hartford, meet the team, and we'll just go about after the weekend. We'll go about our business and see how this thing turns out. So the long and short of it is, I joined the team. I landed up signing that PTO plus 3 more throughout the year. Led the team in penalty minutes. We won a Calder Cup. Had an amazing year overall as a team, a collective, the chemistry with the team and me personally. Landed up negotiating my first ever NHL contract with Bobby Clark on my own. Didn't have an agent because, again, I was bouncing around these minor leagues and didn't really think I needed one. So I signed an NHL contract with the Flyers and kept on about my business, fighting. I spent 1 more season and a half with the Phantoms, and then eventually got my first call-up with the Flyers in 2006, 2007 season. And made my NHL debut. Paul Homer called me in the office and said, do just go out there and do your thing. And my thing was pretty simple. It wasn't complicated. It was skating in a straight line, banging bodies, and hopefully engaging in a fight or two. Landed up playing 2 more full seasons with the Flyers. Again, just. Began banging, fighting everyone, just trying to get some street credit and get my name out there and get noticed, do my job, be a good teammate. And then 2009, 2010 season rolls around, and John Stevens, who's my biggest fan outside of probably Paul Holmgren, gets fired, and Peter Laviolette comes in, and he had won a Stanley Cup in Carolina without a tough guy. So essentially I was pushed aside and played 17 games that year. And however, I did warm up every single game of that season, including the playoffs. So I was, proud to be that team guy. However, and had I not, I probably would have been sent back to the minors. So it was, it was one of those things that I took pride in. But as you can imagine, it took its toll emotionally, right? Now I was fighting. And now I'm not playing, and now I'm not really sure where I fit, and there's just a lot of question marks around my career. I was dealing with some substance abuse issues. I had a lot of time on my hands, and now I was drinking more than I was. I always enjoyed the party, but now it became a problem, and we landed up going the distance. We landed up losing the Chicago Blackhawks in the finals that year, and it was an amazing run. I just still wish to this day that it would have finished a little bit differently, obviously, but going into the year-end meetings that year, I was, mentally deflated, and I was like, what's going on next year? I had one more year on my contract with the Flyers. And I just laid it all out to Paul Holmgren and just kind of told him where my heart was at and where I'm at. And I had, left it all on the table, left the meeting, had 2 surgeries. And it was those 2 surgeries that were kind of the catalyst for me kind of taking this leap of faith in my personal life. I had a relationship with both cannabis and psilocybin mushrooms before I had retired. A misunderstood relationship, but I had one. And I seen a lot of substance abuse with opioids, sleeping pills, anti-anxiety medications, alcohol, and the whole bit. I wanted to prove to myself I could avoid taking the prescription drugs and just use cannabis for these last 2 surgeries, one on my finger and one on my nose, which probably could use another couple to straighten it out a little bit more. But I used the cannabis to prove to myself that there was a better way. There was a more viable way to manage pain post-surgery than what I had seen. I'd seen so many guys deal with these drug addiction issues post-surgery, again, mixing pills with alcohol and the whole bit. So I made that choice, and I'm super grateful for it. It was highly a success. Pain management, just none of the traditional side effects that you get with an opioid based drug. 3 weeks later, I'm back home in Winnipeg, get a phone call from Paul Holmgren, and he says, listen, there's an opportunity for you to coach in the Flyers minor league system. And at the time, it was the Adirondack Phantoms. I moved up to the middle of New York there. And immediately in my heart, I knew this was the transition. This was the moment for an exit stage left. Leave the game, bow out of the game with honor. The Flyers are loyal to me. I was going to be loyal to the Flyers, get my salary off the cap, and move on in my life, but not to pursue a career in coaching, but it was really to engage in this path of healing and really redefining my purpose and recreating my identity, shedding the old Riley, the hockey fighter, the hockey player, and moving onward. So that's what I decided to do right there in that moment. I told him I would sleep on it. I knew in my heart that that was the decision I had to make. But that was what I chose to do, and I got into coaching. But I had some concussion-related issues. I'd been in over 200 hockey fights, and you talk about repeated head trauma, TBI, and the whole bit. And this was kind of built off my understanding of cannabis as pain management tools, some of these plant medicines that help with brain regeneration and neuroregeneration, neurogenesis. And I started leaning on different cannabinoids, CBD specifically, as well as psilocybin mushrooms to treat my concussion-related issues. So I engaged in this path of holism, right, and tapping into Mother Nature, nutritional healing, realizing that, God created the medicine in the food, and that food is healing if you actually have a relationship with it. So there was all these kind of like stepping stones to the next stepping stone of healing and understanding my body a little bit more. And then I started understanding that I needed to take action. I couldn't just supplement my way out of this. I needed to take action. That's where the yoga practice came into place, and it started with the cult of the physical body, but obviously as you practice more, understand the philosophy of yoga, you end up realizing it's much more of an inward journey to essentially meditation and tapping into breath, prana, life force, and the whole bit. So having this experience and this knowledge, now I just felt called to bang the drum, right? Bang the drum around plant medicines, like you're trying to help reform healthcare, and try and help reform the mental health crisis that we're dealing with, which in my opinion now is almost like a spiritual crisis we've engaged in, right? We're just not in alignment, and that's what I realized. I wasn't in alignment. I was living my childhood dream. I was making more money than I ever made, and I wasn't fulfilled. I wasn't spiritually fulfilled, emotionally fulfilled. So I realized that there was things that you needed to have in place to feel that happiness and feel that alignment. So banging the drum around the plant medicines, cannabis, hemp, way beyond cannabis as medicine, is an industrial resource, viable industrial resource, building material, textile, food, a very digestible protein source. The list goes on the cannabis plant. And then the same thing around the world of fungi, mycelium and mushrooms. And I just felt called to speak for the trees, speak for the fungi, and Eventually started running into other athletes that were speaking about the same things that I was and had this very similar experiences that I had had, and then eventually formally founded a nonprofit called Athletes for Care, actually with Lindy Snyder, the daughter of Ed Snyder, is the chair of our board, who's heavily involved in these spaces as well, and have been a big believer in reforming healthcare and mental health. So naturally, that was all advocacy. He was banging the drum, just speaking for the trees. And eventually, my heart was, in a perfect world, if you can combine your passion with business, that you're onto something. You're on the right path. So I got into some cannabis plays early. I got into some cannabis consulting, and then pre-COVID, I founded a cannabis company called The Collective that has a few different companies in the portfolio, and one of them is an interesting project with the oldest historically black university, Cheney University. We're building out a hemp-derived cannabinoid processing facility as well as a cannabis curriculum. So, obviously the black community has been most affected by prohibition. So there's a huge element of social justice there, but beyond that, it's about healing, right? It's about helping introduce different alternative healing methods to the population. And that's one of the pieces in the cannabis play. Another one, just more on the recreational side of things, with a couple licenses in New Jersey. But my whole angle with it is to introduce mindfulness into these medicines, to cannabis, to mushrooms, to any psychedelic. Really, is just having a very specific, intentional, mindful use and intention before you engage in these types of things. So yoga is a perfect vehicle to help make that connection. And then on the psilocybin mushrooms type side of things, I'm actually heading back to Jamaica tomorrow, where mushrooms are legal and unregulated. So pre-COVID, I went down to Jamaica for some healing, and I connected with this new psilocybin mushroom company. It was really based in Canada. Operates legally in Jamaica, and just seeing what they were doing with not only just naturally occurring mushrooms, but with the technology associated to the brain, just like these brain scanners and the data collection and connecting, DNA samples to different type of genome sequencing, where they have a relationship with the Lieber Institute, has the largest database of genetically profiled brains. So I was just like, wow, this is pretty profound. The merging worlds of indigenous healing and modern medicine and more clinical healing, right? These two worlds merging. So I mention all this because it is the future. I mean, it is no question the future of mental health. The psychedelics, and I'm leaning heavily on the psilocybin mushrooms side of things because that is what I have the most experience with and what I've seen the most healing with. But you see Aaron Rodgers come out, a month ago, talk about his best season in the NFL was after his ayahuasca ceremony, and he'd also participated in some psilocybin mushroom ceremonies. But this is beyond healing, right? Now we're talking about optimizing human performance and just being a better version of yourself. So there's elements of optimization associated with it, but my whole mission now is, again, using the physical body, the physical practice of yoga as a vehicle to help normalize these plant medicines and integrate them, right? I mean, we always talk about the medicines and the use of them, but then we just forget about the integration piece, right? We need to take action, right, as human beings, and that's what I've learned is, I think Western medicine has allowed us to become victims and just like rely on the doctor to heal us, where we just fail to just realize that we have to take some action and be a part of the healing process, right? I mean, from what I have learned is that the human body is a pretty amazing mechanism, right? It's designed to heal. We just interfere with its ability to heal. So that's my mission. My mission is to well, first of all, be honest, right? I mean, there's a lot of people out there that are not being very honest with this movement, and because it's about money, and there's capitalism in healthcare, and there's a lot of flawed science, unfortunately. So being truthful with these original medicines, because they were here a lot longer than we have been here before we called them alternative medicines. And I think just getting back to the roots of healing and just, again, helping reform pain management, anxiety management, sleep management, and then the whole PTSD, TBI component of healing. That's the world I came from. Heading down to Jamaica tomorrow, as I mentioned, doing a veterans retreat. So a lot of PTSD, a lot of TBI. And these guys, I've done several of them. It's pretty profound to see guys with that type of trauma come together, be vulnerable, cry, let it out there, forgiveness self and forgiveness for others and all this other stuff. It's pretty profound. You talk about mainly males, right? The really toxic masculine males that are, that think they have it all, and they have to portray this very masculine persona, break down and have that ego crumble and then kind of rebuild themselves back up. So I've witnessed some profound stuff. I am blessed for the journey I've had. If I could, I look back and I always joke, if I could have scored 50 goals a year and made, $7 to $10 million a year, I would have. But the reality is, looking back, I wouldn't be here today had I had that path. I'm grateful for all the blows to the head. I'm grateful for the grind. I'm grateful for Philly and my opportunity to play in the NHL here for 4 years and have a fan base that stuck behind me and cheered me on, and grateful for where I'm at today. I wouldn't be here otherwise. So I'm thankful for this opportunity. I know I'm probably past where I need to be at the time, but very grateful for this opportunity to be here and share my story. If I can ever be of service for any of you guys, I'm not that hard to find. So appreciate you.
But if you're taking, there we go. If you're taking the bus back to the Ritz, we're going to get you out here in about 5 minutes. If you're not taking the bus, we'd love you to hang out for a few more minutes and chat and talk to Riley a little more. So I got a question. So, mindfulness is such an important topic. It's an emerging topic. We actually, SERMA, sponsored a session on mindfulness last week in Vegas at the American Bar Association Sports and Entertainment Law Society. So really important topic. Talk to us about how challenging it was coming up as a player and trying to, fight every day, not literally fight, but fight to maintain your career, while also having the pressure of literally having to fight, having to inflict pain on others to justify your place on the team. That's I would imagine that's an incredibly stressful process. How'd you deal with that?
Yeah, it absolutely was. And again, my toolbox is pretty limited, right? It was alcohol, it was street drugs, right? Because these are the tools that you're leaning on to manage the stress and the grind, right? Because most people didn't grow up in a family with Buddhist monks that were teaching mindfulness and meditation, right? So there was a lot of substance abuse around the sport, and that's why I think substance abuse is ingrained in sports culture. I'm not going to say specifically hockey because it's ingrained in all sports culture and culture in general, right? We don't really have a nicely created manual for us to live by. So it was a grind, yeah. A lot of drinking. I think that was part of my issues, right? It was a lot of unsustainable living, and then that's part of my mission now is to try and reform that, right? The mental health topic is everywhere. Everyone's talking about it. Now you're seeing athletes stepping out of competition, Olympics, pro sports, because they're not feeling right. And I commend them all because that is a sign of strength, right? I think long gone are the days where you have to fake looking and appearing well, right? I think people are now becoming more vulnerable and speaking about their problems, and it's helping other people. So the mindfulness component now is just like, I think we've overtrained the physical body. How much faster, how much bigger, how much quicker, and how much more skilled can we get? I think the missing ingredient is teaching athletes and people how to focus, to concentrate, and teach them how to manage their stressors and their anxieties.
So you mentioned, just a follow-up, you mentioned your trip to Jamaica and maybe breaking down some of the feelings of, macho, only physical, among veterans, but I bet that feeling still happens in the NHL. You mentioned Holmgren called you in and said, do your thing. It's probably a little bit more challenging even today to get some old school hockey people to buy into what you're saying, that, it's not just about the physical, body, but there's other things to consider, especially when it comes to players' wellness.
100%, yeah. The old school way of thinking is just tough it out, suppress it, and bottle it up, and just move on and work hard, right? And I think that's slowly falling by the wayside. That type of thinking and that type of being. However, it still exists. Don't get me wrong, it still exists. But I think what I'm trying to do is, starting with, let's say, the Flyers and Flyers alumni, is just showing, starting from my network and showing them that there's a better way. A lot of the guys that have gone through substance abuse programs have gone traditional AA, where, you have to be a Buddhist monk almost to survive these programs. You have no mindfulness practice. All of a sudden, now you have to abstain from essentially everything, including pharmaceutical drugs and CBD and stuff that doesn't even impair the mind. So there has to be a shift. There's a shift of consciousness and awareness, right? I mean, it's looking at this current paradigm and realizing it's heavily flawed, and we have to be more intelligent than it, and have to reform our own opinions and intelligence around it. So that takes time, right? As you see this in politics, it's almost, and I hate to say it like this, it's like the old school eventually will have to, you either have to accommodate and adapt to the new ways, or essentially you die off in this very simple, narrow-minded way of living. And unfortunately, I still deal with people like that interfering with this movement, right? They still want to be prohibitionists. They want, there's not enough science, not enough science. Well, I mean, there's plenty of science, it just lands up being very political when you start weaving in, pharmaceutical science that, that it was flawed, to trump, these plant medicines. So we're going up against a lot, but there is a shift in consciousness for sure. I mean, if you follow the news at all in the last couple of years, I mean, between cannabis and plant medicine, different types of plant medicines, it's constantly being thrown out there, and it just takes time, obviously.
Check out this month's edition, or maybe it was last month's edition, of Rolling Stone magazine, one of my favorite magazines ever. There's a feature on Riley in the middle of the magazine. Great story. Check that out. For more information, how can people learn more about what you're doing, Riley?
Well, I have a personal website, rileycote.com, riley@rileycote.com for email. I'm on all social media. You can find me there. Yeah, reach out if you have any questions. Again, if I can be of service in any way, would love to.
Thank you so much. Riley Cote, everyone. Great presentation. Thank you so much.
Ideas, strategies, and opinions represented on this podcast are those of the speakers and do not represent the ideas, strategies, and opinions of their employers.